coming out to help me pass my class in the listening and speech. So, and I was allowed at least to pick the topic I wanted to talk on. And most of the time when I tell people what I do for a living is, well, what is occupational therapy? And even doctors get occupational therapy mixed up with physical therapy. They think it's all one and the same, and it's not. And in some places I go, they call it OTPT. Like it's all one word, you know. They don't look at the differences in them. So I thought, well, let me just go ahead and take a chance and try to differentiate the two. So I've got my question up here. And millions of people are affected sometime during their life by birth defects, genetics, diseases, catastrophic accidents, or age-related illnesses. Many diseases, there's many possibilities, and most people have a good chance of recovery if they have therapy intervention or specialized intervention early on, and this is called therapy. Well, there again, most people will think about that, you know, physical therapy. Well, physical therapy is very important, and once upon a time, physical therapy mainly just addressed the walking, and it became very popular after World War I believe it was, when the soldiers that came back that did survive World War I and World War II came back, and they were either missing limbs or they couldn't really function, so they needed to have therapy. So that's kind of how the birth of therapy was. Occupational therapy, you know, physical therapy is all fine and dandy. It's great to get up and walking, but there's some steps you have to do first, and some of the steps would be able to roll over in bed and sit up first. That's where your occupational therapist comes in, because we work on those neurodevelopmental techniques, which if you think of a baby, when they're developing, they roll over first before they're up on all fours. And so there's a few things that come before walking. So that's kind of where OT, or occupational therapy, comes in, is to help get that person ready for physical therapy and ready for walking. And the other things that physical therapy involves. I do want to share a little story that happened, a true story that happened early in my career, because I was one of those late starters. I was in my 30s and already had 4 kids before I went into therapy. My first job was in a rehab in Houston, and most of the patients we had were geriatric patients. And so I had been rehearsed in my spiel what to tell people. I'd go up to this little 90-something-year-old man. He's, hello, my name is Lynn Akin, and I'm going to be your occupational therapist, blah, 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 blah. And sweet little thing, he looks at me and says, no, dear, I retired a long time ago. So a lot of people, you know, when I tell them I'm an occupational therapist, oh, you do job training. Well, no, not really. So, and the difference actually between the physical therapy and occupational therapy, occupational therapists do address the physical aspects of it, but we go beyond that. We address the psychological. We work with school-age kids, and now, in today's times, because of the budget cutbacks and everything else, occupational therapists are having to put their hands in other areas to try to keep the field up and growing. And so in the schools, a lot of what we're addressing is what we call assistive technology. So I do a lot of with computers and with special needs children and the children that can't learn. So I'm always looking at ways to help them learn in the way that they're able to learn. And there's a lot of there's children that have been born with cerebral palsy or other problems, and so they're able to function very well when they have a computer, but oftentimes because of physical limitations, they need to have adaptive equipment. Okay. And what about the guys that are coming up from the war that have lost a limb or something else? They need to be fitted with an adaptive, with a hook or an arm, so that's also where OT comes in. They start working with people on helping them get back to functioning life. So I'm going to go ahead and touch on, because I try to pull out some of the things that I thought would be most relevant and most interesting to my audience. And some of the physical aspects would be stroke. That's a big thing in occupational and physical therapy. People have had strokes, and to be able to overcome it, they need to have therapy. So there are 2 major types of strokes. One is ischemic stroke, what we call ischemic stroke. And those are the most common, and those are about 83% of all strokes. And what happens is when a blood vessel becomes blocked, it blocks blood to the brain, and then the person often will have what we refer to as a stroke. And so clots can form, a clot can form in your lung and travel through and break loose in the head, and then that's where the stroke is. Now, if you have a blood clot or a stroke on your right side, your left side will be affected. And if you have the stroke, if you have the incident on your on the left side of your brain, your right side's affected. The sad thing is, if you have a stroke that affects your right side, that also takes your speech most times. You know what the person's saying to you, but because of where the speech center of our brain is located on the left side, it affects our expressive speech. And so we have a difficult time trying to express what we want to say. So we see a lot of people with really great, you know, they get very aggravated, they get very frustrated because they cannot tell people. Imagine if you could tell somebody you need to go to the bathroom, you need to go now. Just think how frustrated you would be. So the psychological aspect is where OT comes in to help, and then also the adaptive programs and assistive programs to help with these people. So speech usually addresses that, but OT addresses is usually it's side to side. It's speech and OT together that are addressing those, what we call aphasia or those type of strokes. Okay. Hemorrhagic stroke is more when the blood vessel in the brain bursts or breaks, causing bleeding in the brain. Actually, and usually this is a result of high blood pressure. People that have uncontrollable high blood pressure, they're more prone to the hemorrhagic stroke. And most of the time, and it didn't say here, it is also caused by an aneurysm. Most of the time, hemorrhagic strokes are fatal. People don't survive them. It's a much bigger stroke. A third type of stroke, which anybody can have. You don't have to be an elderly person. I had a 30-year-old person that had TIAs. And people with diabetes and other problems like that can also suffer from what we call transischemic attack or a TI. And it's a minor stroke that for a few days can affect the person and then the person can recover. So actually this is a whole different field for OT within itself because there's so many different aspects. But usually OT is working on helping the person be able to roll over in the bed. They work on the bed mobility, roll over in the bed, be able to come to a sitting position, balance training, which is sitting on the edge of the bed so that you can afford things, skills, your self-care, your dressing skills, and any adaptive equipment you might need to use. So, I mean, there's quite a few things under OT that OT would address, but physical therapy, they're not going to address all these other things. And then I included cardiac in here because OTs, after a person has a major cardiac operation or something, they have lifting restrictions. They can't bring their arms outward. They have a whole lot of restrictions. And so OT usually is called in to help design programs that a person with cardiac problems can do. Exercises, activities. We also have something called energy conservation programs. So, and that's how we kind of address the person with cardiac problem. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and turn my little sheet. I probably did this backwards, but so the types of disabilities treated by occupational therapy would be stroke, cardiac. Okay, traumatic brain injury. I have worked in traumatic brain injury programs. Congenital defects and cerebral palsy. Most of the time, a child is born and something happens at birth and the result is cerebral palsy. Or we can address mental, which is Alzheimer's, dementia, psychological problems associated with a physical injury. I did work with a policeman at one time that had been hit by a car during heat while he was on duty, and he had a lot of psychological problems, not being able to return back to his job. So in children, ADD and ADHD, and then what we call developmental delay nowadays is also known as mental retardation. Those are just some of the things that OTs would address. So we have the current interventions of occupational therapy would be neurodevelopmental, cardiac rehab exercises, which I mentioned, cognitive retraining for the traumatic brain injury, plus for anybody who's been affected by a stroke. Sensory integration intervention, which is something fairly new out in the market now that's now being termed, and that applies to children that just don't seem to be able to function in the school system. And what they're finding is apparently children nowadays are not getting all of the sensory systems. You have tactile, you have vestibular, you have the visual. There's so many different systems of the body that we take for granted that these children, their systems don't seem to develop early on because, you know, kids aren't climbing and doing things back when we were for a reason. Those motor skills were needed. Okay, and then assistive technology. There you go. That's where the computers come in and the communication aids and other things. I'm just kind of touching on everything because it would be a really long talk, and this does not need to be a long talk. So I'm just breezing over it, and I will answer questions in a few minutes. So in traumatic brain injury, there are cognitive retraining programs. There's self-care, training, and adaptive equipment. There's fine motor skills. If you stop to think, can you think of a fine motor skill? You do it with your hands. Is there something that you can't do now you used to do? What about typing? What about handwriting? What about zipping clothes? Buttoning? Makeup? Those are all fine motor skills.
Don't do stuff
Okay. But I'm just saying, you know, that's one of the things that I would address. Okay. Work modifications. We have people that return back to work and they need work modifications. Assistive technology and community reentry. You're going to keep hearing that assistive technology come back in. Did you know glasses can be considered assistive technology? Yeah. Because it helps you to see better. They're just not the electronic. It's more of a low, what they call low level. It's not real as costly as it used to be. Okay, congenital defects, cerebral palsy, developmental delay, mental retardation. So we would take the neurodevelopmental approach to these children. We have developmental training to parent and caregivers. Imagine if you're a young woman and you're just now having your first. How are you going to feel if something is not right with that baby? Scared. You wouldn't be the only. You know, and that's there was a poem, and I don't have it, but my trip to Holland, and that was put out many years ago by a family or someone who was talking about their Down syndrome child, that, you know, you're expecting this trip to Paris and all of a sudden you end up in Holland. Anyway, I talked about the beauties, you know, that there were, but you can imagine being a young parent and then your child is born and it's not perfect. So that's where an OT comes in more with the small children, with the infants, than physical therapy. With physical therapy will be called in later on when the child's walking and standing, trying to develop those bones. We do custom splints and equipment, activities to enhance the development. Oral motor, speech, and feeding. Do you think about speaking as oral motor? Do you think about chewing as oral motor? Because we take it for granted. I worked at a state school for 4 years, the best education I ever had, and we had one man in his 40s that was about this long. He was all contracted and contorted, and his head was stuck in this position. You had to be very careful how you fed him so that you wouldn't choke him to death. So school-age children, the ADHD. I address a lot of fine motor skills in writing and assistive technology and classroom modifications where I'm at right now. Mental, Alzheimer's. We do education to the caregivers. Alzheimer's not necessarily something that you can do retraining with the individual because it is a progressive disease, but for a long time, insurance wouldn't pay for anything towards if you had a loved one with Alzheimer's. They wouldn't let you have therapy, but now they're finding out that the education of caregivers, the environmental adaptations, and the activities to combat the disease are certain things that we can offer the person that has Alzheimer's, because they go through different stages, and so there's certain things that will help them. My mother was one of those that had Alzheimer's. So. Dementia, we help with memory strategies and with adaptive schedule and environment. And then there again with the psychological problems of the injury, we do a lot of job retraining and community reentry. And I have done that, and that's always very rewarding. And that's kind of OT. What is OT in a nutshell? So do you have any questions? Or is that just too much? Is that more than you wanted to know? That's interesting. A little late in the day, y'all are falling asleep. You ready for pie? Okay. Well, thank you very much for taking time out to listen to me and let me give my spiel. And hopefully I shared some things with you didn't already know. I saw some heads nodding. So, turn it off.